Alex Mercer slid his carry-on into the overhead like a ritual. Wheels in, handle out. Row 14, seat A, the wing slicing the sunset outside. AmeriWest 219 was the kind of Monday night flight business travelers slept through. DFW to Denver, 2 hours and change. A line of lights that usually meant nothing more than a rental car and a hotel key fob. To the cabin crew, it was a full but ordinary run. To Alex, it was a pause between projects, an inbox he couldn't quite kill. And quiet as static, a secret hobby that lived on his laptop at home. Thousands of hours in X-Plane and FSX, flying airliners that never left his desk. The lead flight attendant, Marisol Vega, did her safety demo with the kind of cadence that made new flyers listen and old flyers nod along. Captain Mark Tolbert and First Officer Priya Shah had introduced themselves with clipped confidence on the PA. Smooth air, expected arrival on time, welcome aboard. The cabin hummed with that after-work murmur of people reheating their lives over text. Alex thumbed the photo of his wife Hannah and their 6-year-old Miles on his phone. He had promised he would be home by bedtime tomorrow. He meant it. The A320 pushed back. Brake release, the almost imperceptible roll. In 14A, Alex watched slats extend like careful fingers. He knew the call-outs he couldn't hear. Flex, SRS, runway, and the swish of the side stick in the captain's left hand. He knew the numbers on the flight control unit by heart, the way someone else knows the lyrics to a song. Heading, altitude, managed speed, the philosophy of Airbus, where the airplane was a smart colleague you learned to trust. He never said that out loud. You say you fly desktop sims, and people smile politely. You talk about ILS beams at a dinner party, and you don't get invited again. Rotation came with that lift against the gut. Gear came up. Dallas became a grid of gemstones falling away, and the dark above settled around them like a blanket. Alex closed his eyes and let the climb carry him. He didn't know, not yet, that in a few hours, every hour he had spent pretending might be the only thing standing between 142 souls and a headline. Cruise leveled at 35,000. The cabin went to low light and quiet. Drinks, soft laughter, laptop screens. Marisol slid a ginger ale across to Alex and made small talk about the Rockies getting snow early this year. He smiled and said he liked the window seat because it taught him patience. She laughed and said that was a first. When she moved on, Alex put in earbuds, a playlist of piano and rain he saved for the sky. The engine settled into that steady, reassuring thrum of a machine that has nothing to prove. Far ahead over the high plains, a problem was already knitting itself together, one of those freak alignments that end up as a line on a report or a scar in a life. Nobody on board would notice it until a smell, faint and metallic, found its way into the cabin like a rumor that wouldn't go away. It started as a question in the air, something like heated electronics or the ghost of oil. At first, Alex thought it was his imagination. Then he saw Marisol pause at row 10, glance toward the galley, and touch the interphone. Other attendants sniffed, subtle, the way people do when they don't want to start a panic. Alex pulled a bud from his ear. The thrum of the engines was the same, but the smell wasn't going away. Up front, in the cockpit, Captain Tolbert frowned as the E-cam stayed clean. No warnings, no failures. Just a tickle in the throat that made him clear it twice. He checked bleed air parameters. They were normal. Priya adjusted the packs and looked at him. "You getting that?" He nodded. "Let's run the air conditioning smoke checklist," he said, cool as the printed page he'd rehearsed 100 times. Oxygen masks were in arm's reach, but still untouched. Precautions had a rhythm, and rhythm was how you survived. In the cabin, a few passengers noticed. A mother asked if it was safe for her toddler. Marisol's smile didn't break. "We're checking it now." She dialed the interphone again, eyes flicking to the forward bulkhead where the cockpit door sat like a promise and a wall. At 35,000, the smell thickened. Priya coughed, once, Then again, sharp enough to pull her headset away. "Captain, I'm feeling—" The syllables scattered. Mark reached for the oxygen switch. The moment moved too fast and too slow. He put the mask on, tugged to inflate the harness, the world sharpening behind closed pressure. Priya's hand hesitated, then fell. She slumped sideways, restrained by the belts, her eyes rolled white. Mark keyed the mic. "Denver Center, AmeriWest 219, declaring pan, air conditioning smoke indications, crew incapacitation suspected, request immediate descent." The breathy echo of his own voice in the mask steadied him. He set altitude select to flight level 200, pulled for open descent. The A320 nodded and bled speed, obedient and alive. He reached across to try to lift Priya's mask to her face, but his hands shook and the edges of the world darkened. In row 14, Alex felt the pitch change and knew without thinking they were going down. Controlled, planned, but urgent. The smell bit his tongue. An attendant moved briskly, eyes too bright. The PE came on thin and tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are addressing an issue and will update you." Alex felt the cabin tilt a few degrees and thought, "Open descent, good, get lower air." At 28,000, Mark's fingers failed him. He tried to say another call, but the syllables wouldn't link, and then all at once, he wasn't there. The autopilot held what he'd asked for. The airplane kept flying, patient as a metronome. In the cabin, Marisol's training took over. She strapped into the jump seat to ride the descent, ran a cabin-secure sweep with her crew, then did the one thing she dreaded most in 17 years. She picked up the emergency interphone and called the cockpit. No answer. Her eyes moved to the door panel. Company procedures, two-crew protocol, security overrides that required verification and timeouts. She did exactly what she'd been taught, exactly the way the manual diagram showed, with the interphone cradled to Denver Center, patched through by a dispatcher who knew this was above anyone's pay grade. A male voice came on, firm but calm. "AmeriWest 219, cabin. This is Denver Center. We've got you on frequency. We're going to help you." She looked down the aisle and said the words she hoped she'd never have to string together. "We need a passenger with any cockpit or aviation experience to come forward." The sentence felt like breaking glass in her mouth. Alex's hand was already in the air. Marisol hustled Alex into the galley, eyes scanning his face for the kind of confidence that wasn't arrogance. "What experience?" she asked, blunt. "Home simulators," he said. "Airliners, Airbus, a lot of hours. I know the flows. I can talk to ATC. I can follow a checklist." He said it like a prayer and a confession. She held his gaze a beat longer. "We will do this by the book," she said. "I'll keep the cabin calm. You do not touch that door until I tell you." He nodded. He knew why, because doors were promises and walls for reasons no YouTube video could explain. Her interphone crackled. Denver Center was now a voice named Kelsey Park, and on a monitor at the airline's ops center, a duty captain and 2 Czech airmen had joined the call. "We're going to coordinate," Kelsey said. "We'll talk you through. What's your oxygen situation?" "Cabin crew on portable bottles," Marisol said. "2 pilots unresponsive." She didn't add that she'd seen Priya's hand twitch in her peripheral when the door had briefly shown the sliver it gives you when you do everything right. It meant there was a line they might still walk back across if they could get this machine on the ground. The door logic did its slow, scrutinizing dance. The cabin crew followed every step, and when it finally admitted them, Alex felt the temperature of the world change. Cockpit air is a different shade of quiet. It's not the hush of passengers. It's the hum of systems alive. Captain Talbot slumped against his harness, mask on but fogged, eyes fluttering. Priya's chest rose shallow. Both were effectively out. Alex slid into the left seat at Marisol's gesture. She'd chosen the captain's side only because the headset hung there and the world runs on what's ready. His hands hovered, not touching anything, until the voice in his ear said, "You're doing fine. First, stabilize." He read the flight control unit like a living sentence. Altitude set 20,000, vertical mode OPDES, speed 280 knots, heading managed, Autopilot 1 engaged. Good airplane. It had kept faith. Denver Center, AmeriWest 219, Alex said, and to his surprise his voice was level, assisting from the left seat. I have simulator familiarity but am not a rated pilot. I can follow instructions. The frequency took a breath. Copy 219, Kelsey said, professional, giving him just enough warmth to hold on to. We've got an Airbus captain from Front Range 452 on the frequency. He's going to be your coach. Name's Dan Rooker. He's behind you at 22,000. A new voice, slightly winded with his own workload, filled Alex's headset. Hey, 219, Dan here. Breathe. The jet is yours to manage. Don't try to be a hero, just be a good crew. First things first. Oxygen in the overhead. Do you see the captain's mask status? Alex checked. On, pressurized. Good. Leave masks as is, don't futz with them. Confirm ECAM. Any active warnings? Alex scanned. No ECAM warnings. Cabin altitude normalizing. Fume smell present but lessening. Copy. We'll keep you descending to denser air. Kelsey? AmeriWest 219. Descend and maintain 10,000, pilot's discretion. Turn left heading 330 vectors Denver. Expect ILS runway 35 right. Alex's fingers went to altitude, dialed 10,000, pulled. The nose dipped. He swallowed. The panel lights blurred, just for a second, and the fear arrived, not as panic, but as a clear thought. If you mess this up, people die. He kept his hands off the side stick. Marisol strapped into the jump seat behind him, a portable bottle slung across her chest, eyes never leaving the pilot's. I'm here, she said quietly. He nodded without looking. He was suddenly grateful for 1,000 tiny, pretend emergencies he'd flown through at his desk, for every time he'd practiced finding the ILS in a fictional storm. Pretending is how we teach our hands what our heads will need. Front Range 452, Dan said. We're going to set up for a very long straight-in. Alex, can I call you Alex? Great. Alex, we'll use managed speed until localizer capture, then you'll go flap schedule when I say. Keep the autopilot in. The airplane can do this. You're just its hands. Alex smiled without meaning to. He liked systems that wanted to help. Out of the right window, the dark plains rolled under them. Somewhere up ahead, Denver was a city of pearls in a bowl of shadow. The A320 began to feel less like a beast and more like a very opinionated partner. He could work with that. At 18,000, the altimeter wound through the transition, and Alex instinctively reached toward the FCU to set standard. Dan chuckled in his ear. You're fine. Leave the barrow where it is. ATC will give you the altimeter soon. Kelsey returned with numbers. Altimeter 2985. Maintain 210 knots. Alex dialed speed, select 210, gently pulling the knob to go from managed to selected. The A320 shrugged and complied. The smell had faded to a metallic memory. Marisol checked the pilots again. Still breathing. Still somewhere far away. She glanced at Alex's hands. They didn't shake. She wondered if that was courage or shock or both. Let's brief the approach, Dan said. ILS 35 right at Denver. Final approach course 353. Glide slope intercept at 8,000. Decision altitude call will be on the PFD. We'll plan flaps 3 to keep it simple. Landing conf 3. Auto brake medium. You see the ILS frequency in the MCDU? Alex paged, verifying. 110.3. Course set. LS buttons on. He armed the approach mode. Not yet, Dan corrected, a smile in his voice. We'll arm APPR when you're on the vector to intercept. For now, heading select 330. Kelsey brought them lower in long, patient steps. Other airplanes ghosted past on the TCS, choreographed by people who had turned ordinary calm into art. The frequency had a different texture now. Nobody stepped on anyone. Somewhere in all that, Alex remembered he had a body. He hadn't taken a full breath in minutes. He let one in and felt the blood come back to his face. Marisol fed him simple tasks. "Do you want water?" He nodded, took a sip he didn't taste, handed it back without looking. She could see the tiny sweat at his temple and decided not to mention it. People don't need to know they're sweating when they're doing impossible things. "Front range 452, Dan said. "I'm going to throw some memory items at you wrapped in plain English. If I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down. The goal is no surprises. The airplane will try to protect you from yourself. Let it." Alex said, "Copy." He felt the glass rectangle of the PFD and ND in his periphery like good company at a bar. You don't have to stare to know they're there. "AmeriWest 219, Kelsey said. "Reduce speed to 180. Turn right heading 020. Maintain 8,000 until established. Cleared ILS 35 right." The words were a ladder, each rung close enough to the next to climb. Alex dialed 180, turned to load 20, and at Dan's now, he pressed APPR. The flight mode annunciator read LOC and GSU. The airplane reached toward the radio beams like a tuning fork seeking pitch. The diamonds began to slide toward center. This was the part of sim videos where YouTubers turned on chill synth. In real life, it was the part where 14 rows of strangers unconsciously straightened in their seats and thought about the people they loved. Marisol gave a cabin PA with a voice like a soft blanket. "We will be landing shortly. Please ensure seatbelts are fastened tight and low. You may see emergency vehicles as a precaution." What she didn't say was that she had put her crew at stations and rehearsed the post-landing steps there were no pages for. "Glide slope alive," Dan said, teacher voice flat and kind. "Localizer alive, speed check, flaps 1. Alex put his hand on the detent and moved it. The airplane exhaled. "Flaps 2. The nose lifted a whisper. "Gear down." Alex lowered it, the thunk like a promise. "Speed to 160, Dan said. "Let the auto thrust hold it. Good. Flaps 3, we'll stop there. Set auto brake medium. Done." The A320 felt more like a bird and less like a dart now, nose steady, riding a beam you couldn't see but could feel in your bones. Outside, the front range stood black against a darker sky. Inside, 3 words appeared on the FMA that Alex had seen in screenshots and manuals, but never in a place that could bruise. "Land." He swallowed. "This thing is going to try to auto-land?" he asked. Dan said, "It can. We're in a good box. Keep your hands on the side stick and the thrust levers like you're ready to dance if the band stops. But let it sing if it wants to." On the ground frequency at Denver, the tower had already called the trucks. Foam crews idled in place. An ambulance team had their eyes on a gate that would become sacred for a night. Airport ops had cleared intersections. There are nights when a city holds its breath and doesn't know why. Altitude 8,000, glide path diamond nested, localizer arrow, dead center. Speed settled at 155, then 150 as Dan feathered changes in Alex's ear. The runway lights were still just an academic idea on the ND. The A320 flew as if it had decided to be kind. Alex's hands rested on the controls like hands on a sleeping dog, there if needed, gentle if not. He could feel every micro-correction through the stick, the way the software he'd paid $50 for back home tried to imitate, but never got quite right. "Cabin ready?" Kelsey asked. Marisol answered, "Cabin ready." She looked out the tiny porthole in the door and saw nothing but ink. It felt like believing in something you couldn't name. Behind her, the 2 pilots breathed, a pair of stubborn metronomes insisting on a future tense. "Approach lights in sight," Alex said, before he knew he had. There they were, a string of white leading them down like a hand extended. The runway followed, a darker slab inside the lights, longer than any street you'd ever seen. "Continue," Dan said. "Let the box fly. At 40 feet, if it doesn't flare, you will. Call-outs are automatic, but they'll sound like a poem you don't remember learning." The airplane's brain did the things Airbus brains do. Tracked, protected, whispered through servos. 100, the machine said, voice calm as ever. Alex felt the ground reach up. 50, 40. The nose made a tiny, delicate rise. It was doing it. 30, 20, retard. The word that sim kids turned into memes thrilled through his hands. He eased the thrust levers to idle. 10. Touch. Not a kiss, not a slam. A mortal landing, a good one on a long runway under a lot of eyes. Spoilers bloomed like startled birds. Auto brakes bit. Alex kept the centerline with small nudges. Hands now doing things his muscles had practiced in a room that smelled like coffee and carpet, not jet fuel and fear. Reverse green, he said because he'd heard it said. The engines whooshed with authority. 80 knots, Dan said. Stow reverses, manual braking, let her roll. Vacate when you can, you're okay. Alex breathed for what felt like the first time in an hour. He took the first high speed, followed the painted line like it was a promise everyone in the airplane had just kept together. On tower frequency, a new voice arrived, cracked with relief. AmeriWest 219, welcome to Denver. Trucks are following. Stop on this taxiway when able. Alex brought the jet to a stop. Parking brake set. He looked at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Marisol had the door in view, ready to receive the medics. Cabin remain seated, she said over the PA, even though half the passengers were already crying quietly or laughing like they were breaking a curse. A man in 7C crossed himself 3 times and then hugged the stranger next to him. Someone started clapping and then thought better of it. The night outside pressed in, full of blue flash and white flood. Alex, Dan said, softer now, you just did a thing people will tell stories about for the rest of their lives. Stay with me a little longer. We're not done until the wheels are chalked. He gave him a flow in words. Flaps up, spoilers disarm, AP off, transponder to ground. If you can find the APU, start it so you can shut down the engines when the trucks say it's safe. Alex followed, failing once, then finding it. The airplane answered each step with a light, a click, a silence. The medics came like a tide. They threaded through, masks ready, hands sure. The cockpit door opened wider for them than it ever had for anyone who didn't wear wings. They took Captain Tolbert and First Officer Shah with gentle violence, checking pupils, oxygen, pulse. Marisol saw a flutter of eyelids, answer a penlight, and swallowed hard. Alex finally took his hands off everything. He pressed the mic one more time. Denver, AmeriWest 219, are we good? Kelsey's voice had a smile you could hear. You're very good, 219. When the engine spooled down, the airplane changed species. It became a room. The pressure in everyone's shoulders released all at once. Passengers started to stand and then sat back down when the seatbelt sign glared its tiny, insistent red. Relief has rules too. Out the windows, the world was a blur of reflective jackets and purposeful movement. Someone in 18D was sobbing into their hands. Someone else was texting a spouse, thumbs losing the fight against adrenaline. Marisol met Alex's eyes. Only then did she let hers shine. You were the right person at the right time, she said, then squeezed his forearm and went to coordinate the offload. Her crew had work to do that would never make TV. Wheelchair requests, phobic flyers mid-attack, a child who needed to pee now that crying was over. Operational grace is a quiet talent. The cockpit was full of uniformed strangers, airport ops, fire, medical. Dan's voice faded with a goodbye and a frequency change. He still had a job to do, a descent to fly, a cabin behind him. He said, off frequency through Kelsey, that he'd like to meet the guy someday. Kelsey said she'd make introductions. The aviation world is big and small at the same time. In the jet bridge, a woman wearing a suit and a badge with an airline logo introduced herself as Sandra Chu, station manager. She had that kind of compassion that sounds like logistics. We have paramedics with your pilots. An ambulance is en route. We're going to deplane. There will be media. There will be questions. You do not owe anyone anything. She said it to Alex like a vow. He nodded. He thought, suddenly and fiercely, about Hannah and Miles. He pictured the way his son would bounce as he ran down the hallway and leap, unself-consciously, into his arms. He pictured having to tell Hannah why he couldn't get on airplanes anymore. He had a flash of the runway coming at him again, the long grey rush of it, and had to sit down. Captain Talbot stirred on a gurney as they wheeled him past. His voice was a scraped whisper against oxygen. You flew her down?" Alex said yes, because anything else would be a lie. The captain tried for a smile that looked like a grimace. "Good crew resource management," he said. And then the medics moved him along. Priya's eyes opened a slit and then closed with medical insistence. News travels as fast as curiosity. By the time AmeriWest posted a bland statement online, the first shaky phone videos were already up. Blue lights, passengers hugging, a woman saying, "I think someone from the back landed us." Comment sections erupted into the usual storm of cynics, saints, and people who speak with authority about things they've never touched. Alex walked into the cool Denver night, flanked by airline staff, resolute in their refusal to let cameras get a clean shot. He was placed in a quiet room with water and a blanket he didn't need. Someone brought him a phone already dialed to his wife. When he heard Hannah's hello, he made a sound he didn't know he could make. It wasn't quite laughter or crying. It was relief getting out of his bones. "Are you safe?" she asked, skipping any theater. He said yes. He told her he would be home the next day. He didn't tell her that when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the side stick under his palm, in the way some people feel a phantom limb. He didn't tell her that he was suddenly terrified of stairwells because they descended. By morning, the story had a shape you could recognize. Gamer lands passenger jet after pilots fall ill. The words did what words do online, flattened the strangeness into a headline with teeth. Alex's old college roommate texted a screenshot from a national morning show. His photo from LinkedIn, blown up and framed by a lower third that made him into an archetype. "Dude," the text said, "you're a legend." Alex stared at the screen until the letters blurred. AmeriWest's comms team released a measured gratitude. Appreciation for crew professionalism, for ATC partnership, for emergency responders, for a passenger whose assistance contributed to a safe outcome. Internally, emails multiplied like bees. Unions wanted facts, legal wanted caution, flight ops wanted data. In group chats populated by people paid to fly, the tone was a cocktail of pride and discomfort. No pilot wakes up hoping a stranger will have to do their job. No pilot goes to sleep without believing that sometimes the calendar chooses you. The NTSB opened an incident investigation. Preliminary language pointed toward a bleed air contamination event, organophosphates hitchhiking on the airplane's own breath, a problem with 1,000 arguments attached. The captain and first officer were conscious within hours and would keep their lives and their licenses, but the board wanted to understand exactly how the boundary between safe and not had thinned. A producer called Alex's cell with an offer of a platform and a car service. Another offered money. A podcast wanted to do a 6-part series about home simulators saving lives. A law firm wanted to talk about liability waivers and hero protections. A congressional staffer wanted to know if he would testify at a hearing about cabin fume events. Hannah wanted to know what time he wanted dinner and whether tacos sounded like a food he could trust. Alex sat with a therapist the airline provided and told her about the call-outs that still unspooled when he tried to sleep. He described the smell, the way it had announced itself like a trespasser, the way the airplane's voices had sounded like they were inside his head, singing a lullaby in a language he barely knew. She asked him if he felt like a hero. He said no, honestly. He felt like a guy who had been in the wrong place at the right time, with the right obsession. Online, arguments bloomed. Some said the simulator community proved its worth. Others said this romanticized luck and minimized a system that had prevented a disaster. Redundant machines, professional crews who had set the airplane up, controllers who had threaded the needle of airspace with genius ordinary enough to miss. A retired captain wrote a column that went viral. The passenger didn't land the airplane alone. The system did. Alex read it twice and nodded, then felt defensive for reasons he couldn't quite name. A week later, Alex met Dan Rooker, the voice in his ear, at a coffee shop near the airport. Dan was younger than he'd sounded and had a laugh that cut through Alex's residual static. They talked about flows and family. Dan said something that stuck. "The best flying I ever did was the day I didn't touch anything and let the machine do what it was built to do." Alex felt the invisible handshake of humility pass between them. The hearings were polite and sharp. Experts explained bleed air with models and metaphors. A diagram of compressors looked like a seashell and carried 1,000 arguments inside. Was the maintenance program aggressive enough? Did the cockpit masks seal the way the manual promised? Did a checklist press for masks too late because human pride waits one beat too long? Unions brought data and stories. Airlines brought assurances and spreadsheets. Regulators brought caution. In the back of the room, Alex learned the taste of stale coffee and microphones. He told the panel what it felt like to move from 14A to the left seat and have the world shift from spectator to participant like a floor under your feet. He said, very carefully, that he didn't think watching tutorials made him a pilot. He said just as carefully that watching tutorials made him less useless than a random Tuesday would have otherwise allowed. Reporters pulled the sentence out and made it into whatever they needed, but the room heard him the way a room hears a person who isn't performing. The NTSB's final report took months, the way truth does when it's heavy. It gave blame the way reality does. In small, diffused shares, a seal that had aged faster than expected, a maintenance inspection interval that looked perfect on paper and imperfect in hindsight. A moment when putting masks on 10 seconds sooner might have changed the way a night went. It praised the cabin crew for a chain of correct decisions under pressure and noted with restrained admiration that a passenger had provided operational assistance under ATC guidance. The word hero never appeared. It never does in documents written by engineers. In internet spaces where nuance goes to get flattened, the debates played on loop. Some said Alex deserved a medal. Some said he deserved nothing more than a handshake because he had been lucky enough to play his part in a machine designed by people who had thought very hard about how to make luck unnecessary. Alex didn't read the comments after the second week. He watered plants. He learned the names of the neighbors' dogs. He bought noise-canceling headphones he could wear when the world tried to be loud. One night, he heard a distant siren and felt the runway rise again under his feet in his kitchen. He sat down on the floor. Hannah sat with him without talking. After a while, he said, "I feel like I owe everybody something I can't pay back." She said, "You owe Miles a bedtime story," and handed him The Very Hungry Caterpillar. He read it with a voice that broke exactly once. The applause ended quickly. In the hours after the runway lights blurred past and metal finally stilled, the silence arrived like a delayed shockwave. The passenger who had flown the approach was ushered down the air stairs into an ambulance bay that smelled of exhaust and antiseptic. Hands reached for him, EMTs, airport police, airline reps, each with a clipboard, a question, a blanket. He nodded until nodding felt like a reflex he'd forgotten how to stop. Everyone kept calling him a hero. He kept thinking of the way the yoke had trembled in his palms when he overcorrected at 300 feet. Adrenaline is loud while it lasts, and then, when it drains, the world becomes painfully audible. The cough of a diesel generator somewhere on the tarmac, the whispery rip of Velcro on a blood pressure cuff, the stutter inside his own breathing when someone said the word captain, and a picture he hadn't meant to keep of a slack jaw under a mask flashed back so bright he had to close his eyes. When they asked him to sign the consent for a blood draw, he stared at the date and couldn't remember what month it was. Someone said it out loud for him as a kindness, and he wrote it down like copying the answer at school. Investigators arrived before sleep did. Soft voices, hard questions. Had he touched the rudder trim? What checklist did he use? Who told him to disconnect the auto throttle? Did anyone coach him to extend flaps beyond 25? Did he smell anything unusual in the cabin earlier? Oily, metallic, sweet? He answered as completely as he could, the way he'd learned to narrate in flight simulators. Slow, precise, chronological, owning both what he knew and what he didn't. The simulator was the strange ghost in the room. They needed it to be a bridge between a hobby and a miracle, and also not a scandal, not an indictment of the system that had let a paying passenger become the last line of defense. By morning, his name was everywhere. A neighbor texted a photograph of the national news chyrons. Passenger lands jet. The airline statement praised the collective professionalism of the operation. The union thanked him by name, and then in the next sentence urged caution about drawing conclusions while the facts are gathered. He understood at once. A life saved could still be a precedent set, and precedents can be blunt objects. When he finally reached home, the house had the fragile stillness of a place that had been braced for a different outcome. His partner had left a glass of water on the nightstand and 2 folded towels at the foot of the bed, as if survival had a laundry ritual. He slept for 27 minutes, sat up with his heart racing, and went for a walk that felt like balancing on a tightrope strung between porch lights. Airplanes traced faint white stitches across the sky. Every time he heard a descending whine, he swallowed against nausea he couldn't reason away. Messages poured in. Strangers telling him they cried watching the landing video. Pilots who wrote that he'd honored their craft. Critics who asked whether he had interfered. A survivor from row 21 who said her little boy kept asking if the man who drove the plane would be at his birthday party. He answered none of them that day. The only call he made was to the controller who had talked him down, an awkward voicemail first, and then, later, a quiet conversation that bent into laughter at a shared absurdity. They'd said words on a radio, and a jet had obeyed. Grief has its own runway length. The first officer was still in the ICU, his lungs improving. The captain's family asked for privacy. The updates came in phrases that hovered on the edge of dread. Guarded, complicated, not out of the woods. The passenger carried those words like talismans. He replayed the approach in his head at 1x, 0.5x, 2x, looking for any frame where he could have made it safer, softer, more certain. He opened his sim software and tried to replicate the crosswind. He missed by 20 feet. He shut it down and stared at his hands. The first debrief with the airline happened in a windowless room that sounded different when the door closed. There were attorneys. There were 2 flight operations managers, both pilots, who shook his hand with gratitude that felt genuine and questions that were not optional. Had any crew member shown signs of impairment before boarding? Did he see anyone spill a drink near the pedestal? Did he notice a faint haze in the cabin lights? He hated that he still wanted to please them, to be the perfect witness, composed, useful, consistent. Later, he would realize he was also bargaining. If he got the story exactly right, maybe the part that hurt would file itself into a folder labeled Lessons Learned instead of Memories That Wake You. The internet did what it does. A clip from a home video taken in 18A went viral. His voice, thin over the PA, saying, "Folks, we're going to be okay." Comment sections filled with disbelief, awe, cynicism, jokes. Someone found an old forum post where he'd argued about flap speeds. Another user accused him of commandeering the cockpit because he wanted to play pilot. The ugliest thing was not the accusation itself, but how quickly it gained likes. He closed the laptop and promised himself he would never read comments again. He broke that promise by nightfall. In the turbulence of attention, the quietest moments became anchors. He visited the maintenance hangar where the jet sat with panels open, its belly revealed. A mechanic explained, not unkindly, that airplanes rarely fail in cinematic ways. They fail by paperwork, by schedules, by the smallest gasket, deciding it has done its lifetime of expanding and contracting. He thought about responsibility as 1,000 tiny choices that add up until a man with only simulated hours is holding a living machine above a city. Therapy was suggested, then urged, then scheduled for him. The therapist did not call him a hero. She called him a person with acute stress, a person whose brain had done exactly what it needed to do and now needed to learn that it could stop. She taught him to ground himself, to describe 5 blue things in a room, to feel gravity in his feet, to name the sounds outside the window without flinching. She told him nightmares are how the body files a police report on itself. He believed her enough to keep coming back. There were living rooms to visit. He went to the home of the woman from row 21 with the little boy and the dinosaur backpack. He sat at their table and watched the boy line up plastic animals in a parade. The mother hugged him too long and apologized for hugging him too long. He thought, not for the first time, that gratitude could be heavier to carry than fear. He began to attend the briefings as an observer, the NTSB updates, the airline's internal safety bulletins, a seminar full of pilots arguing good faith about what to do when both pilots are unwell at once in the age of reinforced doors. Words like guarded access and remote interventions and dual incapacitation became part of his vocabulary. He did not want to legislate his own miracle into policy, and yet he understood it might happen with or without his consent. There was a memorial, even though most people lived. It was for what could have happened and for the inches by which it didn't. Candles made cones of light on a windy evening. He spoke briefly, much later in the program than anyone expected because he had asked to be last. He told the truth as best he could, that he had not been brave, he had been scared enough to listen. That fear, correctly focused, is a kind of instrument. That he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve the relief on the faces he saw when the plane stopped moving. When the night ended, he stood outside with the controller who had guided him, 2 silhouettes under sodium lamps. "You did it," the controller said simply. "We did it," the passenger answered, and for once the correction didn't feel performative. It felt like physics. Weight shared is weight reduced. He didn't expect to be sworn in. He had imagined meetings, maybe thank yous, a plaque in an office somewhere. Instead, there were microphones that picked up his breath, nameplates, a seal on the wall with an eagle whose wings seemed wider than the room. The hearing was public. Cameras clicked. He raised his hand and promised to tell the truth, wishing there were a way to swear, to tell the whole truth, without telling every private pain as well. The questions from the board were precise. The way good questions are surgical, limited incisions, maximum visibility. Did he believe the reinforced door policies had contributed to the danger? Should there be a mechanism for ground override? Would he endorse requiring that at least one cabin crew member have basic cockpit familiarization beyond the jump seat briefing? He answered as a citizen rather than an expert, and tried not to give the easy, emotional answers that television likes. The truth, he kept saying, was that layers matter. If any one layer fails, another must be waiting. Responsibility scattered like confetti whenever a camera turned on. Commentators blamed fatigue rules, maintenance outsourcing, a culture of just make the schedule. Others weaponized the word hero until it meant whatever their argument needed it to mean. He felt strangely protective of the pilots, men he barely knew who had quietly suffered the worst of it. If he became the story, they risked becoming the footnote. So he said their names aloud whenever he could, and he learned the names of the flight attendants too, the ones who kept the cabin a human place when everything else wanted to drift toward panic. Behind the spectacle, systems began to move. The airline convened a task force that included pilots, mechanics, union reps, and a safety researcher who had the cheerful politeness of someone who has spent her life saying unpopular truths. She presented data on rare but catastrophic crew impairments. She explained how redundancy is not an admission of weakness, but a design philosophy. Assume people can be hurt, get tired, breathe the wrong molecules, and build a path back to normal anyway. The passenger realized responsibility wasn't a spotlight, it was a network diagram. He met the captain's spouse in a quiet office with a window that looked out at the tail of an airplane. They were gracious in a way that made his throat hurt. They asked him how the landing felt. He told them exactly: the shimmy at touchdown, the squeal of rubber, the instant of weightlessness inside his bones when the nose came down. They nodded, as if technical vocabulary could be a balm. He waited for anger that never came. What arrived instead was a sentence he would carry forever. "We're grateful you were there. We hate this, and we're grateful." He understood then that grief and gratitude are not opposites. They are parallel tracks that sometimes cross, and, at the crossing, the ground shakes. Policies did not change in a montage. They inched. A new cabin video script was drafted that included one extra sentence about calling for medically trained passengers and, in extreme circumstances, anyone with flight deck familiarity. A quick access card appeared in the galley with distilled radio phraseology. Maintenance logs were audited with a fresh ferocity that annoyed some and relieved others. The FAA issued a safety alert about recognizing and reporting unusual odors or physiological symptoms early, even when they feel minor. None of it felt dramatic enough to match the headlines, which is probably what safety looks like when it works. He returned at last to a simulator, this time as a guest of the airline, not a hobbyist in his spare room. The instructor, a woman with the calm cadence of a mountain guide, reset the clouds to a gentle layer and gave him a runway he had never seen before. "We're not testing you," she said. "We're thanking you, with parameters." He laughed, and the laugh surprised him by sounding like his old laugh. He flew 2 patterns, dirt simple, and when the sim froze at full stop, the instructor asked how it felt. "Like putting down a story you've carried too long," he said. She nodded like she'd heard that before. The public celebration kept trying to draft him. Morning shows wanted reunions. A talk show wanted to fly him to New York to sit in a chair between a pop star and an actor and tell America how he kept calm under pressure. He said no more often than he said yes. And when he said yes, he asked for time to speak about the ordinary heroics that had nothing to do with him. The flight attendant who memorized the passenger manifest when the printer jammed, the gate agent who sprinted with a wheelchair, the ramp worker who, seeing the emergency vehicles in his mirror, said into a radio, "I'll hold," and blocked a taxiway so no one would blunder into the parade of red lights. He also said yes to the private invitations. He stood in a school gym where the ceiling fans ticked and told 4th graders that courage is sometimes just staying curious 1 sentence longer. He visited a VA hospital and listened more than he spoke. He met a group of controllers in a break room with a microwave that made everything smell faintly of popcorn. They hugged him like a colleague. He went home from those meetings with a gentler ache. It would have been easy to align himself with a narrative that explained everything. Sabotage, negligence, destiny, take your pick. But responsibility felt truer when it stayed messy. He could accept praise without letting it absolve anyone else of building better systems. He could admit fear without letting it cancel the fact that the fear had also been useful. He could tell the part of the story where he saved people and the part where other people saved him. The controller's steady voice, the flight attendant's choreography, the passengers who stayed buckled when every cell wanted to stand. The last conversation that mattered happened on a bench outside the airport under a sky so blue it looked edited. The first officer, recovering, sat next to him and watched a departure roll. "I keep replaying it," the first officer said. "I keep thinking about everything I should have done differently." The passenger nodded. "Me too," he said. They were quiet for a while. A 737 lifted its nose and climbed into the afternoon. "We're alive," the first officer added finally, like confessing to a wealth he didn't know how to spend. "We are," the passenger said. They didn't fix anything in that moment. They didn't have to. They inaugurated a new normal where survival was not a debt, but a shared gift. He flew again as a passenger months later. He told no one on board who he was. When the wheels left the runway, he closed his eyes and let the physics hold him, the way it holds everyone, regardless of what any of them have done or will do. Responsibility, he realized, is collective, not because it shares blame, but because it shares trust. Every rivet, every checklist, every voice on every frequency adding up to the miracle of ordinary flight. He would always be the man who landed a plane he wasn't trained to fly, but he would also be a neighbor who took the trash out on Tuesdays, a partner who learned to sleep again, a person who knew the names of the people in row 21. The story had made him large in other people's eyes. Life graciously kept him human.